start or sit for week 16. And we are talking matchups, and matchups, of course, because we are in the semifinals and we have big decisions to make this week. And matchups play a critical role. So I am talking about 9 excellent matchups to lean into this week. These are players that I see popping up very frequently in start-sit questions. If you're wondering whether or not you should take the risk and start them this week, I am breaking down the pros and cons. Let's dive in. The 49ers offense has finally come back to life in a good matchup against Tennessee, and Jauan Jennings is rising up rankings to close out the season. It was great to see Brock Purdy finally get back on track with volume. Since his return, he had topped out at 200 yards previously, even in a great matchup against Arizona. So seeing 295 yards and 3 touchdowns was extremely encouraging. Both Ricky Pearsall and Jauan Jennings had strong games. Jennings' success came via touchdowns, and he has had 6 touchdowns in the past 6 games. Ricky Pearsall's success came through volume with 6 receptions on 7 targets for 96 yards. We finally saw him look like he was physically right on the field, and sadly, apparently that is the last time that we will see him healthy this fantasy season. In his absence, it only increases the upside for Jauan Jennings this week. This week brings a matchup against Indianapolis, and the Colts, to their credit, they have tried to reinforce their defensive weaknesses, but unfortunately, injuries have prevented them from actually being able to achieve the vision. They have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. A variety of wide receivers have found success against them, making this an excellent opportunity for Jennings to continue his success and capitalize on Ricky Pearsall's absence. Hear me out on this one. I know that you do not want to start Jordan Addison. I know you don't instinctually, because it has been a complete nightmare. It has literally been 8 weeks since we last saw a double-digit fantasy points from Jordan Addison, and obviously that was with Carson Wentz, but it has just been so underwhelming for our guy since J.J. McCarthy returned. We talked very confidently about leaning into J.J. McCarthy last week as a streaming option, and it paid off. It paid off for him, but it definitely did not pay off for anyone else that we actually started in fantasy. And I like J.J. McCarthy again this week in another fantastic matchup. But the big question that we have is, can we actually trust the pass catchers here, specifically Jordan Addison? J.J. McCarthy being under center has made Jalen Nailor fantasy relevant, apparently. The volume to Justin Jefferson has been very messy. He's been getting targets, but they're all over the place. Obviously, we are still starting Justin Jefferson because he is Justin Jefferson. But the real question is whether or not you can deploy Jordan Addison. And I think that you can as a low-end flex option in yet another matchup that is really good against the New York Giants. While he and J.J. McCarthy have struggled to find rhythm, Addison is a big play receiver, and it doesn't take much for him to get there. And looking at the Giants matchups, the receivers that have succeeded largely have been deep ball, boom-type players. Terry McLaurin, Jamison Williams, Christian Watson, Rome Odunze, Jahan Dotson had a big catch, Rashid Shaheed, Quinn Johnston. They all had flash plays there. The pattern seems pretty clear here, and the matchup definitely leans towards being positive, specifically for Jordan Addison's skill set. Injuries to the offensive line have continued to plague Justin Herbert. The last time that Justin Herbert threw for more than 220 yards was week 9. Not so coincidentally, that was Joe Alt's last start. Herbert has had just 5 touchdowns and 4 interceptions in the past 5 games. However, this week's matchup might be the one to finally get Justin Herbert back on track. Dallas has tried to repair the damage to their defense, but those repairs have primarily come against the run. They are still getting lit up through the air. J.J. McCarthy, we talked about it, managed 250 yards on just 15 completions. That's kind of crazy when you break it down like that. Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, obviously, they all took care of business with volume. But even Geno Smith threw for 238 yards against them, one of his better performances in terms of volume. The Cowboys could be without several key players due to injuries, including Quinnen Williams. Herbert remains risky, but this week he could finally give us that QB1 performance. And if that QB1 performance does come, it would specifically benefit Lad McConkey. Now, if you follow me, again, you know that I have been very wary of the Chargers offense. I told you, bail out. This is going to be an issue. Specifically, again, because of the injuries to the offensive line, making things just so difficult for Justin Herbert. That has limited the volume and the touchdown opportunities. So, like in general, right? A quarterback can have a bad day, and the receivers can still get there. Like Jackson Smith-Njigba is literally wide receiver 1, while Sam Darnold is just perfectly average from a fantasy perspective. Sam Darnold can be very mediocre or even have a bad day. and JSN can still get there. But Justin Herbert's struggles in particular are nuking all of his receivers, making them very touchdown dependent. So we have seen success from a wide variety of receivers at Dallas. So that is a benefit here. And this is the perfect bounce back spot for Lad McConkey, especially if Quentin Johnston can't go. So due to the matchup circumstances, the fact that Dallas's defense just cannot improve, maybe we might be able to get the offensive line to hold up just a little bit here for Justin Herbert for him to be able to take advantage of this matchup and specifically benefit Lad McConkey. This Week 16 matchup might finally be the one to get them back on track. And quite frankly, if you're going to have them, this is the last time that you can use them, unfortunately. This is the last hoorah for the Chargers, unfortunately, in fantasy football, because in Week 17, they face Houston. We do not want to start any of them against Houston, so take advantage of this last matchup against Dallas. Quinshon Judkins has been in a rough spot recently. Tennessee in Week 14 was a great matchup, but that was Shedeur Sanders' day, and there was literally nothing on the ground for Judkins, and his day was just salvaged by a big catch and run. Then we thought he would be a pure volume play in Week 15 with both Jerome Ford and Dylan Sampson out, but nope, a whole bunch of nothing. But do not let Quinshon Judkins' awful Week 15 performance against Chicago deter you from playing him in Week 16 against Buffalo. Chicago has been consistently easier to beat through the air than on the ground. Buffalo is the complete opposite. They have been tough against the pass and lit up on the ground. For example, this past week, TreVeyon Henderson had the bounce back game after being pushed into literal mediocrity in the past two matchups, with the return of Ramondre Stevenson in what were good matchups, but unfortunately a split backfield there. That's how bad the Bills are, that they literally willed TreVeyon Henderson back into a massive high upside play. The Bills are giving up over 5 yards per carry to opposing running backs. Now, the only concern here would be Buffalo jumping out to an aggressive lead and Cleveland inexplicably abandoning the run. That logically should not be the case, but Cleveland's defense has fallen apart lately, and Kevin Stefanski does make some odd decisions on a week-to-week basis there, so it's possible that he could decide to abandon the run. Logically, I don't think he should do it because they do not want to attack this defense through the air. The point here is, if you were bailing, if you were ready to bail out on Quinshon Judkins, now is not the time. This is an excellent matchup. Just stick with it one more week. Week 15 was ugly for Tetairoa, McMillan. Jalen Coker had the big day, while poor McMillan was left out in the cold with 2 receptions on 4 targets for 25 yards. I would not panic over this, though. The New Orleans defense, we've talked about it. They're not that bad, and they can be specifically difficult on wide receiver ones. So prior to this matchup, and conveniently wedged in between the Week 10 matchup against New Orleans. So matchup against New Orleans, everything in between then was good. He was on a little hot streak against Atlanta, San Francisco, and Arizona with 4 touchdowns over that stretch. Now, volume, of course, was still inconsistent for him. It does need to be the correct matchup. In Week 16 against Tampa Bay is absolutely the correct matchup to deploy McMillan with confidence. Tampa Bay has allowed the 16th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, which is middle of the road, but the number is a little bit misleading. Their schedule is stacked with teams that either aggressively lean into their tight ends or can be very inconsistent to wide receivers. For example, Kyle Pitts had a 3-touchdown game against them, right? They also faced Trey McBride. Those trump up the numbers. They also faced the Eagles in a week where the Eagles refused to throw the ball to receivers and aggressively targeted Dallas Goedert. So the numbers are a little tilted. Teams that want to target receivers do not have an issue. And Carolina is absolutely a team that wants to target receivers. The Panthers will likely lean on the ground game here, so I would not expect a 100-yard game from McMillan, but the touchdowns should return. DK Metcalf has had shocking, strong back-to-back performances against Baltimore and Miami, and it didn't even require layup matchups for it to happen. Those are 2 adequate defenses, and he did it in 2 very different ways. The matchup against Baltimore was high volume day. The matchup against Miami was more lower volume, dependent on touchdown there. Detroit, this week's matchup, is one of the most pass-friendly matchups in the league. They have a great defense overall, extremely stout against the run. But heading into this week, they have allowed the second fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs and the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. It is a literal layup matchup. When we have seen DK Metcalf underwhelm in good matchups before, that does happen, right? But Detroit almost guarantees that pass catchers have good days because it's the combination of the bad pass defense and their offense being so strong, it forces pass volume. It's literally a funnel. This is the perfect combination because, again, Detroit will be able to attack this Pittsburgh defense, which is specifically vulnerable through the air, very well. Pittsburgh has struggled against the pass all season. If this game script forces volume to be thrown the best way to attack Detroit, we could see another strong game from DK Metcalf. He had 7 receptions on 12 targets for 48 yards against Baltimore. He is capable of sealing games. There is no issue with him as a player. It is simply a matter of volume, and this matchup literally forces it to be the case. Okay, so technically this isn't a risky start. The theme here has been risky starts, right? But last week alone should solidify that you have to play Jacoby Brissett and Michael Wilson if Marvin Harrison Jr. is out at all costs. But I just had to talk about them again because I want to ensure that you guys know that there are clear must starts here. And what kind of fantasy week would it be if I did not talk about Jacoby Brissett? At this point, I literally have appointed myself to the head of Jacoby Brissett's biggest fan club here. I'm about to campaign for him to be a permanent starter, almost to the level at which I campaigned for Jameis Winston. Again, I am a football fan, but I am a fantasy manager first. And as long as my team is not the one losing, I am very pro volume quarterbacks that technically cannot win, but will light it up and make our fantasy days so much brighter. And Jacoby Brissett is absolutely one of those guys. It has been so much fun watching him this season. Jacoby Brissett at this point might be the most reliable fantasy quarterback. That is crazy to say. Everyone downgraded him, myself included. I'm not an outlier there. Everyone downgraded him in this past week because of the terrible matchup against the Houston Texans, a team that has been an absolute nightmare for opposing quarterbacks. Literally, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen combined for 0 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. But Jacoby Brissett delivered the only 3 touchdown performance by a quarterback against Houston this season and had the best overall performance by any quarterback against them. If that is not a testament, I don't know what is. We figured that Trey McBride was going to get his regardless, but people were afraid to start Michael Wilson in this matchup. Wilson had 5 receptions on 11 targets, 54 yards and a touchdown. That's kind of what I predicted. It wasn't going to be an efficient day, but the volume was going to be there and he was going to catch half of the targets and a touchdown might come. So it was going to be a fine day. At this point, all the pass catchers and whatever checkdowns go to running backs. It's beautiful from a fantasy perspective. That is it. And it's critical that we have a quarterback that throws consistently outside of one game a minimum of 40 attempts this week. Now we head into a matchup with an Atlanta defense that has been incredibly inconsistent, but has been on a downturn specifically recently. As long as you are capable of volume, you can attack this defense. We saw it last week with Baker Mayfield. We've seen it with Sam Darnold throwing 3 touchdowns and 250 against them. Bryce Young had 450 yards and 3 touchdowns against them. Tua Tagovailoa, the same Tua Tagovailoa, can't even say his name right. He lost his job. The same Tua Tagovailoa that just lost his job had 4 touchdowns against them. That is how bad this defense is. This is the perfect setup for the pass game here. Now, we do have a little caveat here, right? Because we have to figure out what's going on with Marvin Harrison Jr. But honestly, it makes things pretty clear. We're starting Jacoby Brissett as a top 10 option regardless, right? If Marvin Harrison Jr. does not play, Michael Wilson is a top 10 option, period. Must start. If Marvin Harrison does play, that would then push Marvin Harrison Jr. into a must start, and Michael Wilson will get a downgrade there, but he would still be a fine flex option given the amount of volume that we would likely see in this matchup here. At this point, Michael Wilson is one of the few receivers out there with a legitimate 30-plus fantasy points ceiling. He is a must start if Marvin Harrison Jr. is out, and he is still a viable flex option if he is in. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can follow me across all social media platforms at It's Terror Time. So make sure that you are locked in, subscribed, tuned in, following, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. We are closing out the fantasy season strong and we are heading straight into the off season. Football all year long, so make sure you guys are tuned in, and also make sure that you're tuning in for the live shows on Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST, where you can ask me any question that you got.